And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather Friday morning, marginal VFR, Bering Sea, the Aleutians, right on up into most of interior Alaska. Main areas of IFR now up here over the northern interior, up to about the Brooks Range, and then crossing the mountains there in the west and extending to the central Arctic coast. More IFR here for the North Gulf Coast and in toward Yakutat, and mostly VFR here over the Panhandle. And for the afternoon, becoming the VFR here tomorrow morning over the northern Bering Sea, moves southward to the Pribilofs and even south of the Pribilof Islands. Still marginal VFR here, Bristol Bay, and most of the Aleutians on up into the central and east side of the state, becoming VFR, Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, and in toward Prince William Sound, actually southern Prince William Sound. Just a narrow band of IFR is all that's left there for the Wrangell Mountains down into the northern Panhandle. It's marginal VFR now, almost down to Dixon Entrance. Still a patch of IFR up over the eastern Brooks Range. And for Saturday morning, big area of VFR breaking out over the central interior, as well as areas from the southeast Bering Sea here, the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, right on up into the south central Alaska area. Copper River Basin, marginal, on up into the Tanana Valley and 40 Mile country, actually, and that extends all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast. Still have some IFR here, eastern North Gulf Coast, areas of IFR scattered across the Panhandle, otherwise mostly marginal in that area. And then for the afternoon, marginal VFR, Dixon Entrance, right on up to Yakutat. And most of southern Alaska will be VFR for Saturday afternoon, including Kodiak Island, most of Bristol Bay, and west of Dillingham, though, on out into the Bering Sea, we've got marginal VFR, and that extends right on up along the Yukon River there to the Brooks Range in the eastern Arctic coast. VFR looks like for Kotzebue on up to the northwest coast, Point Lay and maybe Wainwright. And for the passes, Anaktuvik, IFR tomorrow. Expect IFR flying conditions also for Adigan. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR, but improving to marginal VFR for both passes into the afternoon, hopefully VFR in the late afternoon. And that same trend for rainy, gradually improving conditions throughout the day on Friday. And for windy, marginal VFR. Isabel, occasionally marginal, and mostly marginal from Mentasta, as well as Tanita. And Portage, improving, but staying marginal through the afternoon. And Chilkoot and White look to be IFR. Freezing level here, 2,000 feet up to almost southern Kodiak Island there. Otherwise, the main one here at the surface, south of the Pribilofs, just cutting across the Barren Islands, and then southeastward there across the southern Panhandle. And for icing, an area of isolated to moderate icing here in the central interior, with a band extending southeastward there across the Copper River Basin, into Yakutat and down across much of the Panhandle, and some lesser threats out here over the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, right on up in toward Iliamna Lake. And the jet stream, good southwest to northeast flow here, up to 115 knots going right into the southeast coast, and then lighter northwesterlies at about 65 there across the Seward Peninsula. And looking at 9,000 feet, low pressure here right over south central Alaska, upper level trough actually linking up to the one up there in the Arctic. 35 knot westerlies there for the eastern Arctic coast with that feature. North-northwesterlies, 45 knots down the west coast, becoming northeast at about 35 out toward the Pribilof Islands. Southwest flow, 45 knots into the southeast coast. And at 3,000 feet, 40 knots southwest winds or west-southwest winds into the Panhandle. Otherwise, basically westerly flow from Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula here at about 40 knots. North winds 40 knots across the western interior, and west-northwest 35 knots up there for the Pribilof Islands. High pressure out here making for light wind conditions for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And turbulence-wise, look for considerable moderate turbulence here, especially for small aircraft from the northwest coast down across Norton Sound. Also along and in the lee side of the Aleutian Range there, Kamishak Bay, and into Kodiak Island, as well as possibly the Arctic coast.